Okay, in this video, we're going to be covering how to use the JavaScript console when using Chrome developer tools. And what I have here is an Express.js application. It's basically done in Node, but we're going to be mostly focusing on the browser side. And what I'm going to do a couple times is pause the video, put an error somewhere in the code. That way we can help use the JavaScript console and Chrome developer tools to effectively debug our web page. So the first thing I'm going to do is toggle open Chrome Developer Tools. So I'm going to hit Command Option J. Okay, and then I'm going to go ahead and click on these vertical dots and then undock. So it's going to put the console here in a separate window. And to get started, if you want to find an element on the page, you can query the DOM and then it'll take you right to that in the Elements pane. So I'm going to enter Document Query Selector. And notice we have Welcome to Express. That's the first paragraph. I think that's the only paragraph on the page, actually. So we can right-click and then reveal an Elements panel. And it's going to take us right to that spot in the Elements panel. So instead of going straight to the Elements panel and hunting for whatever element you're looking for, you can just put in a selector, whether it's like an ID or a certain tag. And this can be very handy in certain situations. And to clear the console, let's say you have a bunch of stuff in there, you can just type in the clear function and it'll call that, and then the console will be cleared for you. So the console is like working in your JavaScript file. You can just set any variables. So we can say var a, let's call this 2, var b, let's call that 3. And then we could just get to our values. So we can just type them in and then they're going to show up in the console. Functions will work the same way. So I'm going to go ahead and add X and Y. So we can go ahead and add. And so it's going to run just like you're working inside of your file. So it's good to know that they now have this multi-line support. I think that's a fairly new addition that they put in, which is nice. Another thing that you might want to do occasionally is what's called logging to the console. So I'm going to go inside of our project, and application.js is what's basically doing most of the work here. Everything else in this sample application is going to be a library file. So what I'm going to do is I have a couple of console items in here. Actually, console.table we'll get into in a minute. I'm going to go ahead and reload this page. And we see that, so one nice thing about JavaScript is you can pass in multiple items separated by a comma. So we pass in just a string. I normally put a string in here so I know what it is. And then this is usually going to be like an object. It can be an array, or pretty much any data type, which is also a nice feature of the console log. So if we come in here, we can inspect all the data that's in our object. So this was returned by an AJAX request. And then we can go in here and see we have different types of data. And this is formatted specifically for the chart. I'm going to go ahead and comment this out. So the other type of log message that I had was, so this one can also turn out very handy in certain situations. This is console.table. So anytime you have something like an array, this can be helpful for debugging. So I'm going to come back and refresh the page. And let's go ahead and open our developer tools. And you'll notice that you're going to get a item that's similar to a table, except you're going to get an extra column, which is going to be the index value if it's an array. So we have the index value over here, and then item.item, that's basically the label, and then the value. So if we come in here and rerun this, and then if we go down and see the first item, we know we have an object with a key of item and a value, and another key of value, and then they each have values. So if we execute the next line, Breakpoints is something I'm going to cover more in depth in another video, but for now we're just going to step over. That way this console.table, this will actually be written to our console. So if I go back to the console, we can see that this was written out. And then if we were just to compare these items, so the keys are going to be at the column level, and then the values are just going to be printed for every single item in the array. And then the zip code is obviously the 0 index. And notice too that what we're displaying on the web page is actually a table. So it's actually going to match this without having to write in any HTML code. And so that's handy if you want to just quickly inspect any sort of tabular type data. Another handy feature of this is it shows you which data type, so we can tell that this is a number. So for example, if we were to go change one of them, actually what I need to do is put the breakpoint in. So I'm going to go ahead and refresh that. And the next thing that I'm going to do, actually we want to change the value. So I'm going to give it a numeric value, but I'm going to give it in the form of a string. So if I type in console.table, so now we know it's a string because it's in quotes, even though it's a numeric value. So that's kind of another handy feature of using console.table. And so we just covered how to set a breakpoint. We can just click on any line and that will pause the code. Like I said, I'm going to cover this in another video. One thing I will cover very briefly is you can do that through code also. You can pause the code. So if I were to type in debugger, save this, and then if we come back, and let's go ahead and rerun this. So because we have debugger here, it's going to work very similar to having the breakpoint. The difference is you're doing this in code. There's one drawback, and that's you can't toggle on and off without changing your code. See, like inside Chrome Developer Tools, if we toggle these on and off, it's much easier, much more flexible than otherwise we would have to go delete all of our debugger statements. But I mean, in certain situations, you might find that debugger is helpful. Okay, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a few mistakes in the code and then see how we can use the console to walk through and fix those mistakes. Okay, so I've refreshed the page and none of our data has been loaded. So we were expecting a table and we were also expecting a chart to appear, but nothing appeared. So in this situation, what I normally do, the first thing I do is obviously open up the JavaScript console and notice that it'll give you a clue as to what the error is here. So we have unexpected token. And then what's really handy is we can click on they're going to give you the file and then it's separated by the colon. And so it's on the error that they believe is on line 88. And if you just click on it, it's going to take you straight to that file. As we can see, unexpected token, and what's missing, this is an array. So what's missing right here is a comma. So if we were to put that in, but the way we have things set up right now, let's go and put it in the code. So let's scroll up to line 88, and that's where our cursor is. So I'm going to go ahead and make the change, save the file, and we're going to go back and rerun this. So put everything in there, and now all of our data has been loaded. So the console is not just something that's handy to enter JavaScript code in, it'll actually speed up your debugging process when you're working on a specific problem. Okay, so I've made another mistake in the code. So if we go ahead and open this again, we have another error that says uncaught in promise. So the only promise that we have in the whole script is an AJAX call. So we're using Axios as a library that is good for making AJAX requests. So once again, it's given us the file name and a line number, so we can just go ahead and click on it. And so there's an issue right here. So something was undefined. So if we go ahead Let's just go ahead and put a breakpoint right here. And I'm going to go ahead and refresh. Okay, so the AJAX call has been made. Actually, what I'm going to do is click on XHR, and this is our endpoint. So there's probably no issues here. It's just giving us a valid AJAX response. So if we come back to our sources where we just were, so the code is paused right here. And then another thing too is we can just highlight or mouse over a variable, and it's going to give us all the data. So RES, so our response, is an object. So zip code info is undefined, RES. So zip code info is not listed here, but it's in response.data.zipcodeinfo. So that's where we made our mistake. If we go into our code, we know that this is supposed to be res.data. And then if we go ahead and save that, and let's go ahead and refresh. So we remove the breakpoint, no errors, and once again, our data starts loading properly. And the final thing that we're going to cover is there's going to be times where you're working with minified files. Sometimes these are library files, other times compiling and minifying code. And every once in a while, you're going to run into a situation where you need to unminify. And Chrome Developer Tools is perfectly capable of that. So if we were to come in here, and I'm just going to pick, let's go, this is chart.js, which is a really nice charting library. You notice that this is pretty much unreadable. So all we need to do is come down here and click on this is a pretty print button. And so what it's doing is it's going to unminify the code, and now you have something that you can actually read. One drawback of this approach is in a lot of times the minified libraries, they simplify the variable names, so they're not very expressive that way, but this is still a lot better. You can always set breakpoints in here and figure out where errors are happening and such. And what it's doing is it's loading the same file twice. So when you pretty print, it says chart.min.js :formatted. So the formatted means it's unminifying and pretty printing the code. And the regular, the code that we originally had is still in another tab or another pane, and that's still loaded right here. So this is a very handy feature that you're going to need periodically. So this has been a video on how to use the JavaScript console to help you debug, whether it's finding errors or logging information to the console. Thank you for watching.